An inquiry into matters relating to Afghanistan. Please ensure that all mobile phones and other personal electronic devices are either switched off or in silent mode. Please may I also draw your attention to the fact that the Chair of the inquiry, the Right Honourable Lord Justice Haddon-Cave, has made a restriction order dated 22nd of January 2025 in relation to the conduct of those who are attending the hearing. The full order is displayed on the inquiry website and on the door of this court and of the media annex, but I will summarise its purpose. The first part of the order, which applies to this and to all future hearings of the inquiry, prohibits any person from making an audio or video recording of inquiry proceedings from within the hearing rooms without the express permission of the Chair. Furthermore, no person may take a photograph in any room in which inquiry proceedings are taking place and at a time the inquiry is sitting without the express permission of the Chair. For the avoidance of doubt, both of these prohibitions extend to the hearing in the media annex. The second part of the order, which applies to this hearing, arises as the live stream of these inquiry proceedings via YouTube will purposely be subject to a 10-minute delay. Where those who have supplied evidence to the inquiry have applied to restrict information from publication outside of the inquiry, in some instances the Chair has made restriction orders, the effect of which is to protect that information. For the avoidance of doubt, where material or identities in documents shown on screen or subsequently published have been redacted, with or without an overwritten gist, the redacted material is restricted, and it is a breach of the restriction order to disclose what is thought to have been redacted. A restriction order prohibits the use, publication, or dissemination of the information that it covers. In the event that something is said during the course of this hearing, which may breach a restriction order made by the Chair, the evidence may be halted and the hearing room and annex may be cleared for closed legal submissions as to whether any restriction order has been breached, and the live stream YouTube recording will be temporarily stopped for this period. Counsel to the inquiry or the solicitor to the inquiry must be informed of any request to make an application for a restriction order in relation to anything that has been said or done in the inquiry hearing room in the preceding 10 minutes. If an application is made for a restriction order in relation to anything that has been said or done in the inquiry hearing room in the preceding 10 minutes, anything that was said or done during that period is subject to a restriction order prohibiting its disclosure, repetition or duplication until the Chair has finally determined the application. Every restriction order is subject to a penal notice. This means that any breach of any element of the restriction orders may be certified to the High Court or the Court of Session, who will have the power to fine or imprison anyone found to have been in breach of that order. Court rise.
Mr. Glasgow.
Please, sir. Mr. Pughsley, we were having your help as regards the phases that an SIO needs to embark on, initially at the outset of any investigation, but also going through. And we had looked at some of the entries relevant to Captain Wright in his policy file. Can we look at some of the other main lines of inquiry that he had identified at a relatively early stage so that we can understand what he was trying to grapple with and how he managed to grapple with those problems going forwards?
Yes.
Amongst one of the considerations he gave to was the question of whether it might be possible to embark on any form of house-to-house inquiry. Can I ask you, please, to look in the evidence behind Divider 58 58, page 2. This follows on, of course, from the consideration of a scene visit, and he'd identified the problems posed by the security situation in Afghanistan at the time. On the 3rd of October of 2014, a decision had been taken as regards potential house-to-house inquiries, not conducive to Afghanistan, he recorded. However, alternate methods of appealing for witnesses are to be considered. Where house-to-house inquiries are discounted, evidence is to be recorded in determining this decision, in other words, the current intelligence picture. Other methods may include engagement with local religions, community leaders, local Afghan police, NGOs and other recognised intermediaries, whether in person or utilising other methods such as leaflet drops and posters. A house-to-house coordinator is to be appointed, designated as Sergeant Smith. Now, plainly, in designating a house-to-house coordinator, that wasn't somebody who was going to embark on a programme of house-to-house inquiries, but it was someone who was going to look at the alternate, as described, methods of conducting similar sorts of inquiries.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
And is this a prudent step that you would expect an SIO to take when embarking on an investigative strategy, particularly in terms of allegations of murder?
It is. The purpose of house-to-house is to try and identify witnesses. What Captain Wright is doing is trying to identify witnesses by other means. I think it's entirely correct.
And whilst it might be trite to observe house-to-house inquiries as being applicable to Afghanistan, particularly given the current security climate at the time, in terms of his decision that it was necessary to identify potential witnesses, is that the very thing that you would expect an SIO to do?
It is, Chair, yes.
In addition to his attempts to record this particular policy decision, did he also consider whether or not it was possible to recover independent evidence that might assist with establishing what had gone on during the course of any of the DDOs under investigation?
Yes, he did. Not in this decision log, but yes, he has done that as well.
Can I take you to that particular decision log and trying as best to keep it chronologically? If we turn to bundle 3 for a moment and tab 88.
Sorry, could you remind me just of the
Tab 88.
Thank you. I'm with you, thank you.
And in terms of considering Team 1's inquiries in respect of possible data sources, all relevant passive data is to be secured and preserved that relates to the operation leading to the detention of the complainant, that detailing the operation itself and that which surrounded the onward detention and interrogation of the complainant. The reason any material that either visually or otherwise records the events surrounding and including the incident under report may prove vital evidence in pursuit of the investigation. This, of course, is in respect of the detention of one of the individuals, because at this time, Team 1 was looking at the possibility of just detention. The reports of EJK had not yet reached them. But in terms of Captain Wright identifying the need to identify potential independent evidence source, such as video footage, if there was, is that the sort of prudent step you would expect an SIO to take in his position?
Yes, it is.
If we were to look back in the same file, please, to tab 64, decision almost exactly a month later. And this concerns his forensic strategy on the 12th of November. Forensic issues were considered from the outset and recorded in a separate document, and I don't need to trouble you with that. We are in possession of greater material now which can form the basis for a forensic strategy. The forensic warrant officer is to compile a forensic strategy to identify the forensic opportunities open to me in order to guide the investigation. Forensic opportunities may be key in proving or disproving certain aspects of the investigation, especially given the context of this particular incident and the date it took place and the location and environment. Again, in identifying potential avenues of investigation, we've looked now just at independent footage that there might exist of an incident, or indeed here a forensic strategy that might be employed. Are all of those appropriate decisions to be taken by an SIO and recorded in this way?
In my view, Chair, yes.
Obviously, we're looking at policy logs that relate to the latter part of 2014. In terms of these decisions which he had recorded, as we look on to the progress that he managed to achieve for the investigation, beyond simply the recording of his decisions and the rationale behind them, did he successfully put these decisions into effect such that the forensic strategy was explored, or that alternative house-to-house inquiry methods were identified and pursued?
No, the forensics, the house-to-house, and some other decision logs ultimately don't lead to the outcomes I think that they were desired and looking to achieve.
At the present moment, given this is simply a paper-based review, are you able to identify why it was that those strategies were not put into effect and pursued in the way you would have thought they should be?
Based on the paper review, I'd be comfortable and confident to say the lack of resources, the lack of strategic direction and assistance by the Gold Commander, and therefore the Gold meetings, and the lack of accommodation have all contributed, I think, to a lack of progress.
And in terms of who, be it one or more people, that might be responsible for that lack of progress, are you able to identify at that stage who should be taken to task in due course about the progress or lack of it?
Well, so the SIO is recording what he is trying to do. If some of the reasons he is unable to do that is because of resources, because of staffing, or because of strategic direction, then he will have... Gold Commander has responsibility for that and assisting the SIO in that regard. That was Lieutenant Colonel McAllister. And in due course, Gold Commander should be raising those concerns with the person ultimately in charge of the whole of the RMP and therefore all of their resources, which of course was the PMA at this time.
In terms of the progress that was made with obtaining data from UKSF, that's a topic that you have touched upon already.
Yes.
You've drawn the Chair's attention to the observations of Brigadier Rochell in his evidence about the policy that was in place regarding the requirement for UKSF to support all service police investigations,
Yes.
but also identifying the need to ensure operational effectiveness. Can I just ask you about the difficulties that you have identified from the paperwork as to obtaining either the support of or information from UKSF?
Yes, from the documents that I've looked at and seen, the staffing numbers and names that were deployed on the operations come to the RMP pretty slowly. The investigation, I repeat, started in 2014 March. And there seems to be, right up to the very end of the investigation, if I understand the decision logs correctly, there appears to be still lack of provision of any data from UK Special Forces databases.
And we'll come to look at some of those entries in a moment. But just before we turn to them, can I ask you this again, similar to the question I asked a moment ago? Based on your paper-based review, is it possible for you to identify, if there is fault, who the fault lies with about the failure to secure the engagement of Special Forces with this investigation?
Well, without knowing the rank structure, clearly, as well as many other people in the military, Gold Commander, as I think I may have said earlier, if not, I'll say it now at risk of repeating myself. At a very early stage, I would have expected the Gold Commander to speak to his equivalent at UK Special Forces with regard to the acquisition of the data. I would have expected that to happen shortly after March 2014. And indeed, if necessary through escalation, PMA to PMA equivalent within UK Special Forces.
In terms of the sort and volume of material, can we look at some of the policy decisions from the SIO, Captain Wright, to see whether they assist as to whether he had identified the issues in play? Can we look for a moment, please, first to divider 91?
Yes, thank you.
And on the 7th of July of 2014, Captain Wright had identified the need for a system to be in place that's suitable for handling and forensically providing a product that may be used within the investigation. And his reason being, a forensic data handling capability exists within IHAT, and I would seek to have a system which is broadly similar in ability that will allow for the storage, interpretation and analysis of huge amounts of data, which in some cases may be duplicated many times from differing sources. Whilst I, as the SIO, do not need to concern myself with the precise technical detailing, I must be able to inform any potential build what it is the investigation will require in terms of a usable evidential product. And we will come to some of the other entries in a moment, but insofar as whether there ultimately was put in place a system suitable for handling and forensically providing a product that could be used within the investigation, have you seen any evidence to suggest that such a system was put in place?
No, the evidence I found is that it was stopped. It was being progressed, and then a change of personnel, and it appears that there's a new decision from the new personnel to stop the forensic data handling capability from being put into action.
In which case, can we continue with this theme for a moment? Can we turn on, please, to tab 92, which takes us on 3 months to October of 2014. And this policy report identifies not only the importance of recovering the information, but also the significance as to the source. From material recovered in the scoping of Op Northmore in general, SFHQA personnel have been identified as having been involved in the operation that resulted in the capture of the complainant and being responsible for the deaths of the EKIA. All data documentation is to be recovered in evidence which is relevant to the incident under report, paying particular attention to the security caveats of any recovered material. DSF SFHQA will be able to provide data documentation which potentially can identify witnesses and suspects alike. Evidential recovery of this material will help shape future policy and assist in establishing what happened during the reported incident. The correct handling of any recovered material will ensure compliance with established security guidelines. And when you find the SIO identifying the significance of the body from which the material may come and therefore the security implications in the handling of that material, is that the sort of decision you would expect to see recorded by an SIO in Captain Wright's position?
Yes, Chair, sound decision and rationale, I think.
Can we look on, please, to tab 100, which takes us on from October to January of the following year. So the 14th of January 2015, following a meeting with Gold, DSF have offered a representative from their organisation to act as a Special Forces liaison officer. The role has not been clearly defined and will need careful consideration. I've agreed in principle to the creation of this post, but will manage where required. An individual with Special Forces operations experience may well be very beneficial in making sense of evidence likely to be recovered and advising on matters particular to that organisation. Clear terms of reference will need to be set as not to interfere with the independence of the investigation, and access to particular investigative material will need to be carefully managed. So it would seem that having identified, it, as he did in October, the potential sensitive nature of material likely to come into the possession of the investigation, By January of the following year, there are still discussions being had as to how best to secure that material and how it can be best interpreted either by the investigative team or by someone brought in from UKSF.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Is there any suggestion that there's been a lack of progress between October 14 and January 15?
Well, I think from my reading of it, this is where some of the progress is absolutely slow and some of the frustration appears in decision logs. The fine balance here is the SIO is saying the data is more important for me to get than compromise, inverted commas, the investigation, because I can manage the so-called independence bit. This is how important I think the data is to the SIO. Why it's taken another 3 or 4 months, I'm afraid other people can answer that question.
Perhaps if we go on another 3 months for a moment, if we turn back, please, to tab 96. We have a decision from the 24th of April of 2015, which begins with a decision that may or may not be one that is helpful in understanding the progress made by Captain Wright. I'm still unclear where key data or material sits. I must establish whether there are other repositories of potential evidence. Currently, I know that the following are where I can expect to recover evidence: the SFHQA server, the ITS-1, and then in addition, there may be more UKSF-3 or whether their data is held on the ITS-1 system. As to his reason, I need to know where the evidence resides. By determining where this sits will shape my priorities and further policy strategy in relation to evidential recovery. What will follow is the ability to approach key witnesses and personnel. Can we just consider that for a moment? Because by now the allegations presented by Mr. Bang as to the death of his relatives have been in possession of the RMP for 6 months or so. And it would seem that despite the passage of those 6 months, the SIO in charge of the investigation is unclear where the key data or material sits, and whether in fact there are other repositories of potential evidence that he doesn't yet know about. In terms of whether there have been proper and efficient and effective progress of the investigation, what, if anything, do you infer from this particular policy file report, Mr. Pughsley?
I think you can certainly see the frustration of the SIO in that he is not progressing or being able to progress the investigation as he wants to do under a Category A plus again investigation. Back to one of my earlier points. If Gold Commander had spoken to his counterparts or PMA at a very early stage, maybe 12 months before this entry, it shouldn't be, in my humble view, that difficult to identify where the data is. These are operations that took place at a certain place and a certain time by certain people. That should take you, I guess, when you're speaking to the right people, to where the data is. And therefore, back to that element of everybody, including UKSF, being incumbent on supporting the RMP investigation, I'm disappointed the SIO has to write this 12 months later.
Would you have hoped, based on your experience, that it would be easier to identify the relevant locations of information and where that information is physically stored so that requests could be made to access it?
I would have expected that to be easier than it's been.
And once those locations and storage facilities have been identified, would you expect it to be easier to obtain access to that material than it appears to have been in the course of this investigation?
Yes, I do, with all of the appropriate safeguards around operational security and/or personnel involved. I accept the safeguards, but I think it should have been easier.
And of course, when it comes to the question of safeguards, given your, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, lack of experience in a military context, would you defer to the judgment of others as to how best to manage the sensitivities in place when dealing with operational matters or the security of highly sensitive information?
100% yes, but policing also deals with highly sensitive information, maybe not at this level, but it doesn't take years and years and years to make a decision on either where the data is or whether you can have access to it.
In terms of where best the RMP might store any information when they get hold of it and where they might be in a position to analyse it, is it abundantly clear from Captain Wright's decision logs that he wanted to establish a forensic data handling centre?
That's correct, yes, he did.
And that touched upon some of the entries we've just looked at, but specifically he wanted something that was on a par with the facility available to IHAT, the Iraq Historic Allegations Team.
That's correct.
But obviously something that was independent of them, a facility that the Northmore operation could work from, where they could store things at the appropriate level of security clearance and the appropriately vetted individuals could have access to it to review it.
Yes, I think he wanted a system that would safeguard all of the security and safeguarding of individuals and or operations, but also the ability to record, examine and analyse information and data that would assist the murder investigation.
In terms of the progress that was or was not made as to the creation of a forensic data handling centre, can I take you to your paragraph 114 in the report? That's page 25.
Yes.
You had identified in that paragraph that Captain Wright had created a forensic strategy to help focus his investigation, and that was as per guidance by the Murder Investigation Manual, so in keeping with best practice, is that right?
That is correct.
And that throughout the investigation, he had requested that he was supported in this endeavour by the creation of a forensic data handling centre, and that those requests were supported by Lieutenant Colonel McAllister, who was the Gold Commander, and that this was raised higher up.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Ultimately, from the documents you have been provided with, have you come to understand that by February of 2017, Captain Wright recorded that any further work to establish the Forensic Data Handling Centre would be stopped at the direction of the PMA?
At the direction of the newly appointed PMA, yes.
And that was now Brigadier Neil?
That's correct.
In terms of other material that's been made available to you, have you identified that the records show that over £7 million may have been spent on trying to create the Forensic Data Handling Centre, that Captain Wright decided no further, that Brigadier Neil decided no further work would be taken on?
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Insofar as that is a decision that can be rationalised and explained in any way, have you identified from the records provided to you why such a decision was taken and what lay behind it?
No, I haven't. I've not seen any documentation to explain that.
Leaving aside the question of finances and whether or not £7 million was the right amount of money to spend or whether it might have been wasted, just thinking about it from an investigative point of view, if months and a large sum of money have been expended on the creation of a forensic data handling centre, would you expect any decision to stop that work to have been set out very clearly?
Absolutely, yes, I would. If you get, as you say, if you ignore any figures at the moment, this was a request by the SIO supported by Gold that when and if and when we hoped, or they were hoping, they got possession of key data, it could quickly get to the heart of the matter to help tell everybody what happened on those DDOs. That in its own way, I think, shows the importance of the request, without any doubt at all. £7 million is a lot of money, so I'm sure there would be somewhere somebody be able to answer that, the reason for that being stopped and not used.
And it may well be in due course that evidence will be provided or a witness will be called to explain what happened. But based on the material made available to you, Is there anything that you've been able to find that explains why such a decision was taken, or indeed why it took until February 2017 for that decision to be taken?
No. The only thing I could record is what Captain Wright wrote as his reason for the delay, and I have that in paragraph 114, which I can read out if you wish.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Pughsley.
So the rationale is this is the PMA's decision. For me, there remains a requirement for the system in particular to analyse in a forensic manner the data I intend to recover from IT System 1 and other data repositories. I have articulated the requirement in detail to Gold, and I await his direction.
I mean, if we consider the observation recorded by Captain Wright, might it be possible that there is a split in the team as to how best to take the investigation forward?
I think this element and some issues that follow show there is absolutely a split in the team, in my view, from around about the change of PMA and Gold at that time in 2016 onwards.
And obviously, given that this is a paper-based review, are you able to assess whether that split, if there was one, is personality-based or because of other issues at play?
I think it's based on a change of operational direction, strategic direction.
And we will come to that in due course. Insofar as the forensic and strategic plan was set by Captain Wright, we've looked at various options that he had considered: scene visit, inquiries within the local community, if we call them, rather than house to house, efforts to secure independent evidence, efforts to secure forensic evidence, and efforts to secure evidence from UKSF. Was he able to make any tangible progress with any of those lines of inquiry that he had identified?
Very little progress on all of those lines of inquiry by the end of the initial period we're talking about, up to the end of 2016, or the middle of 2016, I beg your pardon.
Can I just take you for a moment, please, to your paragraph 135 in the report, which is our page 30?
Yes.
You'd observe there that the concerns regarding data identification and recovery remained a constant theme throughout the life of Operation Northmoor. And then you wrote, the lack of independent supporting evidence that such a product could have provided has, in my view, hindered the ability of investigators to get to understand the complete picture and the events that took place during Objectives 1, 2 and Tyburn. And it may be obvious from what you've written there, the significance of that observation, but can you please explain to the Chair what impact you think the lack of independent supporting evidence had on the effectiveness of Operation Northmoor?
I can, Chair. In my view, in my experience, independent evidence on any investigation is going to be some of the most compelling evidence you can put weight to in any way, shape or form, by the nature of it. That becomes even more compelling when you have time and recollection problems, as we do in this inquiry. The operations of 2011, witnesses are being asked to try and recollect events 5, 6, 7 years later. How much credibility you can put to that evidence will be tested. If you've got independent evidence at the time, whether that's video, whether that's recording, whether that's digital, you can see how much weight and therefore credibility one can put to that evidence. So it's hugely important in my view.
We've looked at the 3 distinct phases for a senior investigating officer. Sitting alongside the structure that is in place was also the Gold Commander and Gold Group meetings. You told us that the appointment of a Gold Commander and then the holding of regular meetings was best practice. And can you remind us again the significance that gold would play in an investigation of this sort?
Yes, so gold would initially set the strategic direction. So for ease of reference, a covert operation, an overt operation, go and get witness statements, whatever it may be, at a very strategic level, this is the intention, this is what we're going to try and do. The SIO then will deliver against that strategic position, intention, documented. But to do that, Gold Commander has to not only set the direction strategically so everybody's clear, he then has to ensure, or she, it's a he on this occasion, of course, he has to ensure that the relevant support is in place for the team to deliver against his strategic strategy. Now that is including appointing the appropriate staff and the right staff, the numbers, the location that we talked about, and then when things are difficult and challenging and you come up against barriers, as you do in every investigation, the Gold Commander should be the person to try and eradicate, remove and release those barriers to allow the SIO to do his or her job.
In terms of the Gold Group and the meetings that were held, can I take you back in your report a couple of pages? Can we look to paragraph 116, please?
Yes.
Once the gold structure had been implemented and Lieutenant Colonel McAllister appointed, can we have your help, please, with the number and frequency of the Gold Group meetings, first in 2014 and then in 2015 and briefly in 16?
You can. So in 2014, there were 4 gold groups. They were called something else at the beginning of the investigation, strategic command meetings, but gold groups, for ease of reference, there were 4 in 2014.
So that's the 18th of July, the 18th of August, the 29th of August, and then the 6th of November.
That is correct. So 4 in the year, but when you look at the documentation, the content from the minutes is extremely limited. You know, a page and a half of a very important meeting is a regular occurrence. You then, if we move to 2015, there were 2 in 2015, on the 8th of September and the 13th of October. And then in 2016, there were 3. So again, 19th of January, 6th of July, and the 13th of December.
I think it's the 6th of June, in fact.
Oh, I beg your pardon, 6th of June. I've got a 6. I'm just working out the wrong months, apologies. 6th of June.
So can I just ask you this then, before we look at them in any more detail? We've got 4 meetings in the last half of 2014, and then what seems to be a 10-month gap before the next meeting is held in September of 2015, and then only 2, a second meeting in 2015 in October, and then we've got a 3-month gap or so to 2016, but only 3 in that year.
That's absolutely correct. I think the advising reports from the NCA and the independent reviews support my view on this. I would have expected Gold Group meetings to be monthly. From March 2014, they should have been monthly, chaired by Gold, such as it's a critical incident, category A murder investigation. They should be run monthly to support, advise, steer, support the SIO in his endeavours. So to have 4 in one year, 2 in another, and 3 in the other, I think it's way below the appropriate standard.
And if we're thinking of the minimum appropriate standard, is it monthly, or could you get away with every 2 months?
So the manual on something like this would suggest monthly. There is a reason it's called a Category A plus investigation. There are 3 or 4 other categories which are of lower category and therefore lower difficulty. So personally, as a Gold Commander at the time, I would have started off monthly, and depending on progress, you could adapt if you wanted to bi-monthly. I probably wouldn't have, but you could if you were satisfied with progress against the investigation. The other way round is incredibly hard. If you lose control of it, it's very hard to get it back. So if you started off bi-monthly and you've got to bring it forward, then you're playing catch-up all the time, in my experience. So I would have gone monthly, and I would have had very full records of it. And we have a real mixture of fuller records and very poor records from the gold groups.
I mean, one of the reasons for the sporadic nature of the meetings be because people are in different parts of the country or even possibly overseas conducting different elements of the investigation such that it's hard to draw them all together at any one particular time?
Well, people may come and give that in evidence, I guess. I wouldn't accept that personally. You know, whether you're in different countries or different parts of the country, you could have had a Teams meeting or whatever they're called these days, in whichever way, if you physically couldn't get people together. This is a Category A plus investigation accepted and agreed by the RMP. They have to commit to the resourcing and the management of such an investigation. And that is regular, in my view, monthly gold group meetings. Not, which reads a bit like every now and then.
In terms of the failure, if there was one, to hold a gold group meeting up until July of 2014, can we just look at one of the policy file reports from Captain Wright that touches on this issue? Can we look, please, to divider 68? It should be in the same file that you've still got, one of the first tabs at the start of that file.
Goodness, thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm with you.
This is the 5th of May of 2014. The policy decision is in respect of Gold Group meeting, and it reads, at present, Gold has not convened a meeting in relation to this critical incident. With the assistance from the NCA, it's timely that a Gold Group meeting be convened. A request is to be made to PMA to determine a mutually convenient date location to include all key personnel. Frequency of meetings will be determined by Gold, but may need to change to reflect key activity within the investigation. And then as to the reason, PMA has declared this inquiry critical incident status, and as such there is a requirement for him to be informed of key information and also for discussions to be made by him. And it may be that that's a typo. It may in fact be for decisions to be made by him, but we'll have to wait and see in due course. Additionally, the meetings will assist in strategic decision making for other key personnel who will be in attendance. When we look at that note, it'll be for Captain Wright to say whether or not it expresses any frustration on his part, but does it appear that in early May of 2014, he has identified the failure thus far to hold a Gold meeting, and he's identified the need for such a meeting to take place?
Yes and yes, Chair, and they begin, Chair, and this is for others to answer. The Gold Group meeting, in my experience, is chaired by Gold. There is a hint here, isn't it, that the PMA should be at the Gold Group meetings. That's the Chief Constable or the Chief Constable equivalent. He or she, in my experience, is not chairing the Gold Group meetings. That's Gold's responsibility. So a request made to PMA to determine a mutually convenient date. Well, I'm assuming that means PMA should be there. Maybe I'm misreading that. But I think there should be clarity on who is the chair of the Gold Group meeting. And it should, in my view, be Lieutenant Colonel McAllister.
That, of course, is simply the observation of the SIO, Captain Wright, but we know that he had the assistance of others who were providing advice into the team and mentoring him. Could we just look, please, to divider 74? And if we look first to page 3 of that tab.
Yes.
This is from 2015, and we'll come back to look at some of the 2014 minutes in a moment. But just if we identify this is one of the strategic meetings from the Gold Group held at Campion Lines, if we just turn back onto page 6 of this divider, item 9 as it's called, paragraph 26.
Yes.
Gold meetings will now be held on a regular monthly basis in order to allow key personalities to meet and discuss important strategic level issues and provide updates on progress. If unable to attend, interested parties may dial into the meeting over Polycom system. So it would appear that a decision has been taken that there will be regular monthly meetings, certainly as at the date of this entry, which is September of 2015, but no such monthly meetings ever took place, or at least none that you've been provided documentation for.
That's correct. What does follow, if I've got the chronology correct at paragraph 117 of my report, this is dated the 8th of September 15, and there is a meeting in effect a month later on the 13th of October, but I think that's the only time it happens.
And then there is a 3-month break, followed by a 5-month break,
Correct.
followed by a 6-month break.
That's correct.
Unless, of course, there are other meeting notes which have not been provided to us, so you've not had a chance to see them.
Fair point. Absolutely right. Yes.
Just going back to the earlier meetings in 2014 and to get an idea of the sorts of records that have been provided and that are available, can we just look, with your help, please, to divider 72? And behind divider 72, we have the Gold Minute meetings from the 6th of November, so the last of the 4 meetings that you've identified documentation for 2014.
Yes.
And we can see that it is just about a 2-page record of the meeting that took place. If you ignore the list of those present and the sign-off at the end of the 3rd page, it just about adds up to 2 pages in length. It identifies as item 1 investigative and then the media strategy. It then picks out resources, which of course we're familiar with already, simply to observe at paragraph 3 on page 3 of that tab. The issue of resources was again discussed in some depth, with Gold Commander directing that OIOC is to provide a clear view and document detailing what is required in relation to all resources for continuation and completion of the operation. This is to be completed ASAP, as the resource document will need to be shared with DGEP. It then identifies manpower and then the FIO request, and then identifies that the calling notice for the next meeting will be circulated because the date's to be confirmed. You'd said when I'd asked you about Gold Group meetings, not only the significance of them in the first place and the need for everyone, if at all possible, to be present, but also the importance of recording what was discussed at a Gold Group meeting, and that you would expect to find very detailed notes setting out everything that had taken place. It may be that only 2 pages worth of discussions took place here, but at least when one looks at what is set out, is this in the sort of detail that you would have expected to find it, given the importance of a Gold Group meeting?
No, it's nowhere near. It's badly bad. It's one of the worst Gold Group minutes I've seen, I'm afraid, for a Gold Group. The document we just looked at a moment or 2 ago was more like it. That was a fuller document, the September 15 document. But this is the meeting that is driven by the hugely important role of Gold Commander for this investigation, and it should serve as a really full record for what was discussed and what ultimately decisions he made. And they range at a high level. I've had some meetings where they are word for word. The whole meeting is recorded and is typed contemporaneously later, and I've had others with just full accounts. Either would suffice, but in my view, not this.
I mean, on occasions, have you ever had Gold Group meetings actually recorded so there is a perfect record of everything that was said?
If the, so at critical category A plus critical incident meetings, I have done that in the past, whether it be in London on occasion or indeed in Kent.
In terms of the need to get control of the meetings, their frequency, their content, and the manner in which they're recorded, who is responsible for that, please?
Gold Commander. The Gold Commander is responsible, but the PMA should also make sure that this is happening. He has some responsibility to make sure that the process and the system, Gold Command, SIO, is working. Now that was why I was wondering, if you look at the minutes, the PMA doesn't appear to be here, so he is sitting above and being reported to, but he should be reassuring himself that the goal structure and Gold Command is working efficiently and effectively, in my opinion.
And is it down to someone like the SIO in Captain Wright's position, to write a policy file entry in which he identifies the need for meetings to take place?
I think that must have been very difficult for him. I think it should have come the other way, not that's an SIO crying for help, I think.
Can we just look to some of your conclusions that you've reached in respect of this particular aspect of the investigation at this stage? Can I take you to paragraph 118 on page 26, please? You observe there that the more detailed meetings that we looked at a moment ago at tab 74 from September 15 a much fuller set of meetings, and indeed they were a goal group that had been attended by both DCS Williamson, who was the mentor for Captain Wright, and also Mr. Bottomley, who'd attended on behalf of Greater Manchester Police as part of the independent review team. Are you surprised that the minutes attended by independent advisors seem to be much more detailed than those when no one else is there?
I noted it and it made me think rather than surprised. I think it's not the only time. If you look at both occasions when the police personnel are there, the record is a fuller record.
That might be because much more is discussed, because you have the benefit of the experts in the room to help move discussions forward.
It may be. And it may be that more attention is afforded to it when external bodies are there.
Again, that'll be for others to answer in due course, either in statements or when they come to give evidence before the chair.
I agree.
Can we look, though, at some of the provisional conclusions that you reached in light of the limited meetings and the limited notes that you'd seen? You identified in the middle of your paragraph 118 the need for more timely and structured Gold Command meetings to direct, steer and support the ongoing investigation. And you then said that in your experience, this requirement is fundamental to the success of complex investigations. I mean, when you describe it as fundamental, do you really mean that it is vital to ensuring how an investigation proceeds?
I do, absolutely.
You said there that gold groups must oversee, support and ensure the pace of the investigation in line with the Murder Investigation Manual. The Gold Commander is fundamental to the successful implementation of this requirement. Regular gold meetings and full records of the decisions and direction made at these meetings are a basic requirement.
Yes, and it is a basic requirement of something of this nature, I'm afraid.
So when we talk about best practice, this isn't part of the Platinum Standard service you remarked on earlier on. This is actually grassroots level. You have to record what is discussed, so there is a record of it going forwards.
Yes, the comment earlier was on not that it was an easier investigation, but it was a bespoke one-off operation. This is far more complicated than that. So on a far more complicated, serious, difficult investigation that has allegations of murder, gold group, gold structure, Gold Commander is a basic requirement.
I mean, if the Gold Commander and the structure and the meetings are critical to the operation itself, what impact do infrequent meetings which aren't properly recorded have on the potential for an investigation like this to succeed?
So it directly impacts, to start with, on the direction of the investigation, whether it continues in the direction it's going or whether it has to change. It directly impacts on monitoring and evaluating progress thus far, or the lack of it. And it directly impacts on what are the reasons for non-progression, and therefore identifying them and trying to address them.
As regards the Gold Commander, Colonel McAllister, you set out in your paragraph 118, 5 lines up from the bottom, Colonel McAllister has failed as the Gold Commander, and his lack of leadership contributed to the lack of progress and success of Operation Northmoor during his period of command. And that's quite a stark criticism of Colonel McAllister's performance whilst Gold Commander for this first part of Operation Northmoor.
It is, and I think very carefully about everything I've written in the report. It's based on the documentation. He didn't give clear strategic direction. He is actively involved in not finding appropriate accommodation in a timely manner, I think, for the team. He has a key role in acquiring the appropriate, adequate, skilled and correct number and style of staff, and that doesn't happen at this moment in time. And he has a personal role, in my view, of pushing very hard at his level to get hold of the independent data and digital evidence. None of those things were achieved, unless I've misunderstood what I've read. And they are all his responsibility as Gold Commander, rather than personalising it, but they are the Gold Commander's responsibilities, and he hasn't achieved any of those.
In any way, is the responsibility for that shared either upwards to the PMA or downwards to the SIO?
So upwards first will depend on what Gold Commander asked of the PMA, and others will be able to answer that. I can't and didn't find any documentation to that effect, other than one meeting that the SIO recorded where he raises with the PMA the concerns about resourcing and such like, Captain Wright. Of course, there's elements then with the SIO, but I'm afraid at this stage, all the SIO can do is either raise it to Gold, and if he's not getting anywhere with that, raise it again to PMA. So there's a little bit here. It depends, PMA-wise, what he knew or didn't know, but Gold has got, hence it's all over the manual of investigation into murder. It is a fundamentally important role to play.
Can we just turn briefly to consider the position of a silver commander and a silver structure that was put in place? Can I take you to your paragraph 126, our page 28 in the report?
Excuse me. Yes.
You identified that the Gold structure was further supported with the initial appointment of an officer in overall command, which morphed into the position of a dedicated silver commander and supportive silver meetings. So that's the use of Major Cox from OIOC ultimately becoming a silver commander.
That's correct, yes.
Can you help us with when it was that this decision to appoint a silver commander was taken?
So the first silver meeting I could find a document for was on the 5th of January 2016. There then appears to be a break from that silver meeting until the 30th of August 16. And from that date onwards, very regular and meaningful silver meetings, sometimes monthly, sometimes every few weeks.
Is there any document that you found that explains why there was a gap of some length between the first meeting in 2016 and then the second meeting in August of 2016?
No, I didn't find that.
Does it surprise you to find that there was such a gap between the silver meetings in 2016?
Based on what happened thus far from a gold group point of view, no. But once we get to August onwards, Major Cox is determined, in my view, and leads silver group meetings in a very professional way. So I don't know why there is a 6-month period, because once he runs them from August onwards, they're very good.
And just briefly, before perhaps we have our afternoon break, could you help us with the importance of a silver commander and what would be expected of him or her?
Yes, due to the size and complexity of this, so this is slightly different. If you take a normal murder, if there is such a thing, a normal murder investigation, you'll have a gold commander working to and with his or her SIO. Silver doesn't really come in that way in the normal circumstance. But the scale on this, particularly when you've got at least 3 different investigation teams, 1, 2, and 3, Silver is coordinating, if I can see it properly, he's coordinating on behalf of gold all of the activity across all of the teams. And that seems to work pretty well from Major Cox. So it's about trying to help deliver goal strategy. The only thing I couldn't work out, and again others will be able to answer this, there may be some confusion between roles when Major Cox is delivering the strategy for gold, but the SIO, Captain Wright, should be delivering the strategy for gold as well. So whether there was any conflict or confusion there, I'm afraid I haven't been able to find it in the documents, but it's slightly unusual.
The issues that we'd identified, first picked up by Captain Wright and then identified in part by the Gold Commander, such as resources, accommodation, the strategy of the investigation and the like, were those matters that were addressed by the Silver Commander?
I think in some regard, but not all. Okay. Just a little.
In any way, might the fact that from August 16 there are regular silver meetings have balanced off the lack of gold meetings?
In my view, no, they are not the same. The gold meetings from 16 onwards should have been chaired by Lieutenant Colonel Harvey. That's his responsibility and role. Silver is not a gold meeting. Silver is delivering gold strategy. Gold strategy should be checked, monitored, evaluated at the gold meeting by the gold commander.
I mean, in any way, might it be possible that by having the regular silver meetings, which were discussing much of the same issues and trying to put in place gold strategy, might that at least provide some sort of offset for the lack of gold meetings?
I don't think gold's there, Chair. So that's my first question. We can check the minutes. If gold's not there, the answer, I'm afraid, from my experience is no. You can't have somebody who in the chain of this investigation is one rung below the gold commander, chairing a meeting that he is in charge of and pretend that's the gold group responsibility. So some of the activity and the action may have been done through Silver, but that doesn't negate the responsibility, in my view, of the gold commander or the need for a gold command meeting.
I mean, insofar as it's possible to assess Major Cox's performance as the Silver Commander during the course of the more regular meetings after August of 2016, can you give us some idea as to whether or not he fulfilled that role adequately or even better than adequately?
Better than adequately. Like his decision logs, good. I would say good.
So would that be a convenient moment for this afternoon's short break?
It would indeed. Indeed, Mr. Glasgow. How long would you like?
Would you mind my back? I do apologise. I'm told 15 minutes should be sufficient. If we need a few minutes more, can I ask for it and I'll let everyone know before they all come back into court?
Super, thank you. 3:15 or thereabouts, thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
Please you, sir. Mr. Pughsley, just before we leave the questioning in respect of gold and silver, could I just have your help in this regard? As far as the SIO was concerned, Captain Wright, was Operation Northmoor for him a full-time job and the sole focus of his policing inquiries?
Yes, it was.
What about either silver or gold, or indeed the PMA? Were they tasked to look at things beyond Operation Northmoor?
So I believe gold was dedicated to Northmoor. PMA, I would assume, and I don't know, but he had responsibility for the RMP, so therefore it must be much wider than, as big as this is, one operation. And silver, I think, was looking across all three strands of Team 1, 2 and 3.
Okay. One of the things that you picked up on before, and if we can turn to look at it with your help again now, was certainly in the early stage the use of independent advisors to assist the SIO, Captain Wright, and indeed the investigation in general as to how best to progress. Can we look first of all, please, to your paragraph 140, so your page 31.
Thank you.
You identified him before, but Chief Superintendent Williamson was chosen by the then PMA Brigadier Warren to act as a mentor for the SIO, Captain Wright.
That's correct, yes, Chair.
And given Mr. Williamson's experience and skills, was he the appropriate person to pick in order to fulfil that role? Yes,
my records that I found show that he was a PIP 4, which is a significantly qualified and trained senior investigating officer.
So as far as his appointment, that is Mr. Williamson's appointment to act as the advisor and mentor, did you regard that as a sound one?
Yes, I did.
As far as the advice and guidance that he gave to Captain Wright, were they in regular contact with each other?
Yes, and the reports that follow, obviously, I guess, regular meetings were pretty routine at this moment in time.
And in terms of the details that were recorded by Mr. Williamson, did he document similar concerns to those that Captain Wright had, namely concerns about staffing, about resources, and indeed about the progress that the investigation was making?
Yes, he did, even at one of his, if not his earliest, I think, first report, yes.
And without needing to go through each of those reports, could I just ask your help in this regard? Did you get a sense that he found the lack of progress frustrating?
I think you can read that in the reports. If you read the recommendations as they go from 1 to report 8, 9, you can feel that frustration growing with words like, as I've said before, as I've recorded before, resources still aren't in place. You can feel it building.
Did he also have concerns about the frequency with which Gold Group meetings were taking place?
Yes, he did. He recorded that with regard to frequency of Gold Group meetings, yes.
And did he highlight the need for regular meetings to be held in order that Gold's decisions could be explained and the investigative strategy developed?
He did, and he recorded that particularly in his second report.
And if we just look, please, for a moment to one of his reports that you've quoted in the body of your report, we find it at your paragraph 146, bottom of page 32.
Thank you.
Having expressed concerns about the timeliness and progress made throughout 2014, do we see that in September of that year, he wrote, as regards resource management, in accordance with discussions and Gold instructions, Captain Wright submitted a revised resource requirement for Operation Northmoor. It is disappointing to see that resource management remains a key issue, impacting upon ability to conduct prompt and effective progress of this investigation. I endorse my previous suggestions as well as the GMP MCRT recommendation. I think that should in fact be the MERT recommendation, that resource management for Operation Northmoor is subject of urgent consideration to support the OIOC and SIOs to respond to the Gold direction. Gold is progressing staffing requests, but is himself subject of constraints. So do we see that, in fact, not only were the concerns as to staffing and resources identified by Captain Wright, they were picked up on first by his mentor, Mr. Williamson from the NCA, and also by the GMP MERT team, who were giving similar warnings, namely that resourcing just wasn't up to scratch.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
And very briefly, in terms of the potential impact, and it may be very obvious, but if you don't have the requisite resources, be those individuals or locations, and if you're waiting for those to be provided, what is the impact on an investigation which was the size of Operation Northmoor?
It won't progress. It won't move forward in any significant way.
I mean, what you had said, if we look over the page to paragraph 147, all of the issues raised in the document that I just read the quotation from will be impacting negatively on Operation Northmoor and its ability to carry out a comprehensive and timely investigation.
That's absolutely right, yes.
Do you think that impact should have been appreciated by people within Operation Northmoor?
Yes, so I think that those on the investigation teams, SIO, Wright and Co, will absolutely feel this impact. Without labouring the point, regular Gold Group meetings would have seen the impact, because it would have been obvious in those monthly meetings that no progress is being made, or very little progress, to be more fair. And one of the reasons that progress isn't being made is the lack of support, resources, staffing, etc.
In addition to the assistance provided by Mr. Williamson from the NCA, GMP's MERT team conducted 2 independent reviews in 2014. You identified that in your report at paragraph 148. Those reports dated the 15th and the 29th of August of 2014.
That's correct, yes.
And amongst a number of the issues that they identified, can we have a look, please, to those documents or into some of the entries within them to see if they are themes that we've already picked up on before? First, in the file that you've currently got available and open, it's divider number 103. And page 2 identifies the front piece of the report from Greater Manchester Police, Review of Strategic Structure and Management Processes, Operation Northmoor.
Yes.
And then if we look within the internal pagination for our bundle, tab 103, page 7, please.
Yes.
The recommendation to the top of the page that the RMP produce and register the minutes for all Operation Northmoor Gold meetings on Holmes.
That's correct.
A little further down that same page, another recommendation that the RMP formally record details of the Gold Group structure and provide confirmation of the membership and their roles.
That is correct.
If we then look on, please, to tab 103, page 14, as to resource management, the recommendation at the top of that page that resource management for Operation Northmoor is subject of urgent consideration to support the OIOC and SIOs to respond to the Gold direction for a prompt and effective investigation.
Yes.
And picking up again on the resource recommendations by the GMP MERT team, if we look over the page to page 15, please, into the recommendation about a third of the way down, that the Operation Northmoor team relocate to suitable and secure accommodation as a matter of urgency to bring together resources in a premises that are suitable for the storage of sensitive and secret material.
Sorry, I don't see. I'm just double checking the document you have. Sorry, we're on
Page 103, internal page 15. It'll be part of section 6 on the recommendation.
103.
15.
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong 15. Yes, could you do that one again, please?
That the Operation Northmoor team relocate to suitable and secure accommodation as a matter of urgency to bring together resources in a premises that are suitable for the storage of sensitive and secret material.
Yes. Correct.
Those are some of the recommendations that they had identified in their first review. That we know was the 15th of August of 2014. There was then a further report provided 2 weeks later on the 29th of August. We have that in our bundle, please. In fact, we don't. That's always a good start. I'm making that up. I do apologise. Sticking with the 15th of August rather than the 29th of August, which I now can't find, the recommendations that we've just looked at, such as the need to document the goal group meetings, to secure all of that information on an appropriate system, for everyone present at them to be identified, for roles to be set out properly, for urgent consideration to resource management, and indeed for relocation, are those fairly basic recommendations? And I don't mean that in a critical sense to the MERT team, but are you surprised that in August of 2014, those are the sorts of recommendations coming out?
I am surprised, bearing in mind that the NCA had already mentioned pretty much all of them previously.
If you, as either the SIO or the GOLD or indeed the Chief Constable, have received a report like this on an investigation that you were working, what do you think might have been or should have been your response to such recommendations?
Well, if I was the Chief Constable, I would have had immediately a meeting with Gold Commander and the SIO to have a meeting with regard to what was impacting and why the investigation wasn't progressing. And if that then meant that we're to do something significantly different, then I'd have to do something significantly different. But I'd need to know why it wasn't progressing and take a course of action that remedied it pretty immediately. If I was Gold, I think I'd be very quickly doing my job and having regular Gold Group meetings and meetings with the SIO and probably reporting up to the PMA on a bi-monthly basis or something to make sure that he or she was supportive of the Gold Commander.
In terms of whether these recommendations were properly adhered to, could we just look in your report to some of the entries that you've quoted from DC Williamson? Paragraph 151, please. DC Williamson's next report was the 18th of February 2015. So 6 months or so after the recommendations have been provided by the GMP MERT team. His concerns, as you've described, are repeated and recorded more forcefully. He wrote, as you've quoted, in additions to comments made by the NCA, PIP4 in previous reports, it is again disappointing that the additional staff have yet to be deployed to Operation Northmoor. It's frustrating that further delay has been encountered. I have no option but to again strongly recommend to the Ministry of Defence that accommodation and resourcing is quickly resolved. It can be foreseen that unless these critical issues are resolved quickly, the UK will suffer reputational damage in its ability to deliver on ECHR and CPIA requirements for a diligent, expeditious and effective investigation. And he concluded with the observation there is an urgent need to progress strategic accommodation and resourcing issues as well as tactical investigative plans. Now, those are observations that he provided in a report from February of 2015. is it surprising that what appear to be relatively basic requirements around resourcing and accommodation are still being flagged in such strident terms in February of 2015?
It is surprising. It's obviously disappointing. That's the frustration bit I mentioned earlier. You can feel it building in the reports. I think Mr. Williamson must feel that his recommendations are just being ignored. Whether he would say that or not, I don't know. But things don't seem to be progressing. Resources and accommodation should be basic. I don't know what the barriers to it were. I don't know.
Can I ask the same question as before, which is if you had been either the SIO, the Gold, or the Chief Constable in respect of an investigation that received a report in those terms from the independent advisor, what would your reaction have been?
Deeply worried, deeply upset, and it needed immediate remedy. And I'd have the responsibility as the Chief to put that right. PMA, likewise Gold, and the SIO. I think it would need a determined improvement in what's happening thus far.
And for the benefit of those who weren't able to follow the quotation that I'd read out, I've been helpfully pointed to the relevant section in the dividers, and I'm sorry I didn't have it to hand. But can I take everyone in divider 1 to tab 33, please? And the internal pagination in that is tab 32. There is no 33. 32.9. And it's the last paragraph on page 9 of tab 32. In addition, it begins, though, that last paragraph. No. 32.9. It's internal page.
Yeah.
It's my fault, I'm afraid, sir. The divider is right, the pagination isn't. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And that last paragraph, as I've just read out, but I'll read it again for completeness. In addition to comments made by the NCA PIP4 in previous reports, it is again disappointing that the additional staff have yet to be deployed to Operation Northmoor. The further delay appears to be due to difficulties in securing appropriate compliant accommodation, coupled with the current MIR at Campion Lines being deemed unable to cater for additional staff. It is frustrating that further delay has been encountered, which appears beyond the control of PMA and Gold to resolve. I have no option but to again strongly recommend to the Ministry of Defence that accommodation and resourcing is quickly resolved. It can be foreseen that unless these critical issues are resolved quickly, the UK will suffer reputational damage in its ability to deliver on ECHR and CPIA requirements for a diligent, expeditious and effective investigation. And if Detective Chief Superintendent Williamson is right in his observation that it appears beyond the control of PMA and Gold to resolve these issues, what ought the PMA, do you think, to be doing now if he can't resolve it? To whom should he be going to try to resolve it?
So the PMA, in my view, without knowing the structure outside of the RMP, needs to go to whoever can unblock these issues within the Army.
Was there anything in the papers that you saw to indicate why it was that the Ministry of Defence wasn't able to deliver the resources and the location in a timely fashion?
No, Chair, there wasn't. There was lots of frustration through various documents, whether it was suitably the right security, the right location, or wherever it may be, but I didn't see anything specifically from anything above the PMA that says that is why whatever accommodation was not suitable.
If we continue, Mr. Pughsley, with the chronology, please. I'm afraid we've dipped a little into 2015 and 16 at times, but trying to pick up, at least in the life of the investigation, a chronology. We've looked principally at 2014 and relatively early 2015. We've considered the themes that are recurring either through the SIO, on occasions through Gold, or through the independent advisors and the mentors and what they have identified. As to further developments for the life of Operation Northmoor, in April 2015, the RMP informed that there were wider concerns about other DDOs that might require consideration by them.
Yes, they were.
And did N1466 speak to the RMP to identify concerns that he had raised back in 2011?
Yes, he did.
If we just look briefly to divider number 105, so back please to folder 3. We see here recorded as a policy file report for Captain Wright on the 17th of April. N1466 has provided RMP with potentially damaging information to both UKSF and wider defence and even government. He has provided this to me in the presence of N1533, who is obviously aware of what he's told us. The content of information will lead to other lines of inquiry which will need to be approached in a manner that will not immediately identify N1466 in person. At present, the content of his information will remain as intelligence until such time as he commits to providing a witness statement, as will the further lines of inquiry, speaking with those who he has identified as being key players. In terms of the provision of a witness statement by N1466, did that take place, in fact, in June of 2015? And if it helps, you can find the information in your report, paragraph 154.
Yes, thank you.
The 30th of June.
It was, yes, that's correct.
If we pick up the potential significance of what it was that he had provided by way of information to the RMP, can we look at another policy file report for Captain Wright, this time divider 108. Did Captain Wright record N1466 has provided information that indicates a series of like conduct that could include suspected murder and or other matters of criminality. Key to understanding this series is being able to compare and analyse data and material which is relevant. We must get access to that material which in the main will sit on the SFHQA server. And then he identifies comparison and analysis of data relevant to the allegations must be completed in order to identify the veracity of the concerns raised by N1466. As regards the various lines of inquiry that have been potentially identified until a statement was taken, once the statement had been taken on the 30th of June, were there then possible lines of inquiry to follow through the information provided by M1466?
Yes, there were, and Captain Wright had to make a decision around covert and overt strategies.
And did Captain Wright identify potential people who had had discussions with N1466 back in 2011 that he and the RMP would want to speak to?
Yes, they did.
Including, for example, legal advisors as well as the DSF himself?
That's correct.
Okay. Did it become learned as a result of N1466's approach that there was a document stored in a compartment known as Compartment A that contained potentially important information?
That is correct, Chair, yes.
A document that had been written back in April of 2011.
That is correct, yes.
And this was brought to the attention of the RMP in April of 2015.
That is correct, yes.
12 months or so after Operation Northmoor had begun.
That is also correct.
And 8 months or so after Mr. Bang had made allegations about the unlawful killing of 4 of his family members.
That is also correct, yes.
You made observations about the provision or the failure to provide that document to the RMP in your report. Can I take you, please, to your paragraph 158, which is towards the top of page 35?
Yes.
As to the document upon which the matters had been recorded in April of 2011, and that is the document that had been secured in a compartment known as Compartment A, you said in your report that you found it surprising and disappointing that this document was not given to investigators until, in fact, June of 2015.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Obviously, the RMP, until they know about it, are not in a position to make inquiries about its existence or to be asked to be provided to it, or to have it provided to them. But given the policy that you had identified, that identifies the workings between the RMP and UKSF that Brigadier Rothschild had given evidence about, is that why you express surprise and disappointment that a document containing information about potential EJK recorded in April of 2011 was not in fact supplied to those investigating those allegations until June of 2015?
It is, Chair. So any criticism that is drawn from 158 on this is not aimed at the RMP. I agree entirely. They could only do what they could do when they were aware of it. And I stand to be corrected, but I'm sure senior personnel, particularly within UK Special Forces, were aware of the document, and they were aware that Northmoor was being investigated in 2014. For it not to be provided willingly and openly and honestly, bearing in mind, as you said, what is in the protocol, I find surprising.
As to the potential lines of inquiry that were identified by Captain Wright following the taking of a statement from M1466 at the end of June, can we have your help, please, with directions that were issued to Captain Wright by the PMA? If we look first of all, please, to your paragraph 159.
Yes.
One of the individuals with whom Captain Wright wanted to have a discussion was the legal advisor who was said to have provided advice at the time in April of 2011. As far as any direction given to Captain Wright about speaking to that legal advisor, what did the PMA say to Captain Wright, please?
So it was, I think, the Gold Commander, Lieutenant Colonel McAllister, directed that he would speak to the legal advisor, and from the decision log I've recorded, he would speak to that individual first, as there were existing relationships that needed to be managed. So that's Gold directing the SIO to that effect, which is unusual to say the least.
Can we just look, please, at decision logs that relate to this particular line of inquiry and how it was to be progressed? If we start first, divider 111, and that's a policy file report from the 12th of June of 2014. So this is prior to the signing of the witness statement later that month. N1466 has indicated that within the scope of his activities relating to the evidence he will provide are matters that may be subject to legal privilege. He's mentioned that the then SO1 Legad N2108 have been involved in providing advice to the chain of command in respect of N1466's concerns, and that he had discovered potential criminality. I've engaged with Gold on this, and he has directed that I should not approach N2108, and he will do so. As far as Gold commanders giving directions to SIOs not to approach witnesses and indicating that they instead, the Gold commander, will approach the witness, is that something that happens frequently?
In my experience, no. I think there could be reasons for it, of course, that others would be able to explain, but I find it highly unusual.
I mean, in terms of a Gold commander's direct hands-on involvement in an investigation, normally would a Gold commander descend to the direct interaction with witnesses or the taking of accounts from them?
No, he wouldn't. Gold can, intervene and direct the investigation, but highly unusual for Gold to say, in these circumstances here, you could have SIO, a really important witness to see, but I'm not going to let you go and see him. I want to go and see him first. Just seems incredibly unusual.
As to how that situation progressed, can we turn over the page to the next divider, divider 112, please? Policy file report from the 21st of October 2015, so just over 4 months later. As to N2108, the legal advisor, the intention is to meet with him in order to assess his suitability as a witness. Sorry, I'll pause for a moment. It's my fault. Thank you very much. The intention is to meet with him in order to assess his suitability as a witness. Gold had been briefed on this and had directed that he would speak to N2108 first, as there were existing relationships that needed to be managed. Gold did not elaborate on these other than N2108 now works in a particular role and had regular detailings with QPM. And then what was recorded at the bottom of the reason: whilst unusual for Gold to initially engage with a witness, I understand his rationale. So it would seem that whilst you have concluded this is highly unusual, at the moment you aren't privy to a full explanation as to what went on, but it would appear that Captain Wright was satisfied with the rationale provided to him as to why he, Captain Wright, should not approach what might be a key witness direct.
That is correct from his decision log.
Nonetheless, leaving aside the need to manage ongoing relationships, would you expect a gold commander to descend into the granular detail like this?
No, I wouldn't. I would have expected, even if it was, and this may be, you know, you'd have to work through the legal privilege bit, but I would have expected the SIO and a member of his staff to go and see this potential witness, not the gold commander.
Can we just return to your report for a moment, please? Back to where we were on page 35. Can we look to paragraph 161 together? Again, directions given by Gold to the SIO as to interaction with particular witnesses. Captain Wright had identified it of the people he might need to speak to. We've dealt one with the legal advisor, but two was DSF, N1802 as his cipher. Captain Wright was given similar directions by the Gold Commander as to whether or not he, Captain Wright, should engage with DSF. Can we have your help, please, first on paragraph 161, and then we'll look at one of the entries in the exhibits. As to a direction not to speak to another potentially key witness, is that surprising that Gold would give such a direction to his SIO?
Yes, it is, because it's the SIO. The SIO leading the investigation, tactically deciding how to investigate, who to see and what witnesses to see, the role of the SIO. And he's been told by Gold, no, you're not doing that. It is unusual, in my opinion.
Can we look at one of the policy file reports that touches on this? It's our divider 113, please. It's dated the 12th of January of 2016. So just over 6 months on from the taking of the statement from M1466. Thank you very much. Gold has previously indicated the desire to engage early with M1802. Gold has directed that he will conduct the interview with M1802, and when queried on who else he would wish to conduct the interview, he refused to tell me. I reminded Gold that I am the SIO for this part of the investigation, and I should make these decisions. Whilst I accept there may be certain military protocols extended in interviewing senior military or former senior military officers, the decision-making on the investigation areas is mine alone. PIP 4 informed. In other words, Detective Chief Superintendent Williamson from the NCA has been told of this. And then if we look to the reason at the bottom, the last entry, whilst Gold is the strategic commander, it presents tactical challenges if he will not share or allow me to make these tactical investigative decisions. Is that a fair observation for the SIO to make when informed that he is not allowed to conduct an interview and the person who will conduct it won't inform him as to how it's to take place?
I think it is fair. I agree entirely with Captain Wright's decision-making and rationale. Again, I think it's for the SIO to decide, and probably him because of senior officers and another member of his team. But for the integrity of the investigation, for the integrity of the statement, if there was one to come in due course, all of that should be taking place, in my view, by the SIO, not the Gold Commander.
And presumably the SIO would have all the relevant background to be able to conduct a proper interview.
Yes, he would, Chair, and, you know, it's important to say that the SIO, as per the investigation manual, is the person in charge with the investigation in this regard. This is taking the statement from a witness, whatever the sensitivities of it are.
As far as the sensitivities that there may be in liaising with UKSF, at any particular level. What was the timeliness or otherwise of the provision of information by UKSF to the investigation?
So we've already mentioned the Compartment A document. The other information that came slowly to the RMP and Captain Wright was details of who was deployed on the operations, the soldiers.
I mean, in terms of identifying who was deployed on the 3 objectives that were being looked at, Objective 1, Objective 2 and Objective Tyburn, it may be blindingly obvious to state it, but is it quite important for an investigator to work out who was deployed on those operations so they know who they need to speak to?
Yes, is the answer. And of course, numbers. You know, maybe Captain Wright knew, but you've also got to work out your resourcing with regard to how many people you have to see or not.
Insofar as the provision of the information with a roll of personnel deployed, was that not provided to Captain Wright until March of 2016?
That is correct.
You'll find that for clarification, if we need it, at the top of page 36, paragraph 162.
Yes.
You'd identified that this line of inquiry, namely the names of those involved and deployed who might have knowledge, is crucial at the earliest stage of any investigation. Would March 2016 be properly characterised as one of the earliest stages of this investigation?
It's two years, isn't it? It's 2 years after the investigation started. So it isn't. And each one of those, or all of those soldiers deployed, could have helped, I'm sure, very quickly get to what happened on those, and you mentioned 3 operations, or 3 objectives. So that's pretty crucially important. Significant witnesses, whatever you, crucial witnesses, these are people who were there.
And if we just look for a moment to one of the policy file reports for Captain Wright and to an observation he made in June of 2015. If we turn on to tab 115 for a moment, please. In terms of responding to the information that had been provided by N1466, he set out on the 12th of June of 2015, 4 lines down, following receipt of further information from N1466, we will now approach key personnel in order to obtain evidence. And it's not so much the evidence that I want to ask you about, but it's the observation he makes in the first line of the reason for his decision. We are not progressing the inquiry in a manner commensurate with a murder investigation at present. I accept there are unique conditions and different context here, but I've directed that we take this course of action in order to move things forward and potentially bring alleged murders to a conclusion in terms of prosecution, but also remove the possibility of further offences being committed. How important is it that an SIO, months into an investigation, identifies that the investigation is not progressing in a manner commensurate with a murder investigation?
For an SIO to record that in the way that he's recorded it, I think he's deeply worried. This is a document that this SIO, as the Chair asked me earlier, will know is a document that anybody could see in due course with all the right authorities and such like, and he's recording that down for himself and for others to see in due course. And this is 14 months or give or take into the investigation, and in my view, I think he's right. There's little or no data recovered. There's hardly any witnesses seen on given statements, and we haven't got enough resources, and we haven't got somewhere to work from, pretty much. So I'm afraid I agree with Captain Wright's decision log here, dated June 2015.
Can we move on with your help to consider the ways in which Captain Wright did progress the investigation, which takes us into 2016, and the identification of potential suspects who might need to be spoken to? Can I take you, please, in your report to our page 37, paragraph 170?
Yes.
And in light of the information that had been provided to the RMP, did Captain Wright determine that 2 individuals should be designated suspect status?
That's correct, he did.
Right. Now, this is a decision that he took in 2016, 2 years after Operation Northmoor began, and over a year after Mr. Bang had made the allegations through his lawyers that 4 members of his family had been killed by the British forces.
That is correct, yes.
That sort of time gap between the identification of potential suspects and the start of any investigation, leaving aside, of course, it may be that it takes a very long time because it's difficult to work out the people involved, but particularly given that the information had been supplied by M1466 back in June of 2015, were you surprised that it's taken until the following year for decisions to be taken about key individuals who might be appropriately identified as suspects?
Yes, I was surprised after 1466's account and therefore the period to where we are now. Because you have to look at what's new, what escalation is coming, what new information is coming, and there's little, I think. In another regard, you know, people can move to suspect status with new information coming at any time. So from 2014 to 15, there's a question mark, but from the witness statement of 1466 to now, I think is a significant question. Why the best part of 6, 7, 8, 9 months?
And from the documents that we've been provided, that we've given to you, have you been able to work out what the delay was in reaching any of these potentially important decisions?
No, I haven't been able to work it out exactly. I've come to a conclusion that whether it's Gold, PMA and the SIO, they're not quite sure whether it's covert, overt or both. And it seems all of those decisions or lack of clarity is hindering some of the investigation or some of the progress.
Once Captain Wright, as the SIO, had made a decision that one or more, in this case 2 individuals, would fall within the suspect categorisation,
yes,
what options has he then got open to him as to how to progress the investigation?
Well, once he's so from an overt point of view, firstly, once he's declared them as suspect status, if he decides he wants to speak to them, he pretty much has to go and arrest them, and then interview them under caution because they're now suspects. If he decides another course, then which is what he did, of course, then he considers some covert options.
Okay. So it seems to be a fairly stark choice. Once you've designated someone as a suspect, if you want to remain overt, then it's the only way you can speak to them is to do so following an arrest under caution.
Pretty much, yes.
But there may be covert techniques that can be employed in order to carry out further investigation.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
The decision to identify an individual or individuals as a suspect or suspects, is that an important decision in the life cycle of an investigation?
Very important decision.
And is it one that you would expect the SIO would take following discussion with his Gold and Chief Constable, or would he announce it and they would be expected to go along with it?
I think the SIO can absolutely make that decision. You know, the SIO is the lead investigator, but I would expect then that decision to be discussed at a Gold group with the Gold commander.
I mean, insofar as it's possible for you to say, based on what you've read, the decision in May, I think it was, of 2016, finally to identify 2 individuals as suspects, was that the right decision?
So I think it's a really fine balance here. I think it's a decision by Captain Wright that is defendable. It's not the decision I would have made. I think it's a really fine balance. I think he could defend it because there is information that he's in possession of that he decides on a course of action, and of course he'd be able to justify that himself. I think a more appropriate course of action on this fine balance was to treat them as significant witnesses and go and get an account from them.
So just so we understand the difference, if you don't designate them as a suspect, which would require them to be arrested, cautioned and then spoken to.
That's correct.
Keep them as potential significant witnesses and take an account from them, what, not under caution?
Not under caution. So the fine balance is this. The reason he's made them suspect or suspects is because he says in his own mind and his rationale he's investigating criminality and they are suspects for criminality. The fine balance is this, which is unusual in any murder investigation, particularly here. There could be a lawful reason for everything those soldiers did. So they could be properly authorised military operations, which I'm sure they were, but that's for others to explain. The soldiers could have been deployed, therefore, lawfully into those authorised operations, and depending on the threat and the risk and the harm that they faced, they could have shot people lawfully under the rules of engagement. If that's one possibility, I think that allows an experienced SIO to go and speak to them as significant witnesses. Their status could change, so you can go and see them with all the military protocols, but let's forget that for a second. You can go and see those as witnesses. If at any time during that interaction you're getting facts, information or evidence that starts concerning you around suspect status, you elevate, you stop and you bring all the protocols in. You arrest them or whatever you have to do. So that's when I say a fine balance. I think I've recorded, maybe incorrectly, the wrong decision. I believe it's the wrong choice, a decision that I think he could justify, but it's not the one I would have done.
So if we just try to unpick that for a moment to make sure that we've understood if there is a criticism of Captain Wright's decision, what it is and what it amounts to. His decision to designate 2 individuals as suspects is not the decision you would have taken based on what you have read.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
The decision he took is, whilst you don't agree with it, a defensible decision from his point of view?
In my view, it is, yes.
In other words, if we try to interpret what you mean by defensible, if we think of a range of reasonable decisions, does it lie within that range of reasonable decisions?
I think it's a reasonable course of action that to work a covert investigation into a suspect as this is, he would have to consider the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. When you look at that, I think there's enough information personally. He's investigating, preventing a crime, and I think he's got enough information to justify what he did. Because of the unique circumstances I've described of the possibility of a completely lawful activity, I think there is another course of action that he should have chosen differently. And one leads you to timely investigation, and one, certainly in this case, leads you to very slow progress, if any progress, from a covert point of view.
In which case, just recognising that you don't agree with the decision that was made, but the decision itself wasn't necessarily wrong, just not the right one from your point of view, if we mark that as a distinction.
Yes.
And recognising that what you have said is that it was a defensible decision and within the range of reasonable decisions he could have made.
Yes.
You just turn to the possible advantages or disadvantages, whichever way you go with that decision, which is suspect or significant witness. just explain to us, if you can, very briefly, in the time we've got left, what might be the importance of that decision and the advantages one way or the other?
So I think the importance of taking the decision and the option that I would have taken in 2014, subject to operational deployments, I would have hoped my team would be interviewing the soldiers deployed in 2011 very quickly. So you would have got the most, bearing in mind 3 years already passed, you would have got the most contemporaneous, if that is the right description now, certainly the most current account from the soldiers deployed, let's say in 2014, for something that happened 3 years previously. That might lead to better opportunity around acquisition of data, digital, video, and/or forensics. The COVID deployment meant you couldn't do any of those things, because what I don't quite understand with the COVID, not muddying the waters here, because I still think it's defendable, but I can't quite work out why those two are suspect status and other people deployed aren't, if you're going down a covert inquiry.
I mean, from the documentation, did Captain Wright seek the approval of his Gold Commander about the designation of two individuals as suspects?
He did, and I believe he also had the support of the NCA for the covert strategy.
So in terms of the decision that he took and how he went about it, whilst not one that you would have taken, not disapproved of by his Gold Commander.
That's correct.
And indeed the NCA assisted in what appropriate measures might be put in place for potential covert tactics thereafter.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
So at the time that the decision is taken by Captain Wright, no disagreement by the Gold Commander.
That's correct.
And those who had been brought in to advise the investigation, in effect the Home Office experts, didn't express any disagreement with that decision either. And indeed were offering advice as to how to take things forwards.
That's certainly the position that I've seen through the documents.
Okay. If that decision hadn't been taken, and if instead these two individuals, as well as others, had been approached as key witnesses and interviewed,
yes,
would the investigation necessarily have got any more by doing that?
well, that's a difficult question to answer because I don't know. We know what they said in 17 and 18 when they were interviewed. But that's 4 or 5 years later than they could have been interviewed. So maybe their recollection could have been fresher. I think it's probably as far as I could say.
So again, it harks back to the question of how quickly you can begin an investigation, how expeditiously you can move it forward at the appropriate pace and efficiency. Because if you don't have the gold now moment, you have to try to make up for it somehow. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Very fair.
So I see the time. Would that be a convenient moment for today?
It would indeed. Mr. Glasgow, thank you. We'll adjourn now, please, till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And repeat the warning, please don't discuss your evidence with anybody in the meanwhile.
Of course, Chair.
All right. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.